It began on a night I never should have trusted. Silent, dark, and too still for my own thoughts. There was an unease in my chest, something restless and heavy that I couldn't explain. That night, I crossed a line I never imagined I'd be capable of, and yet, when darkness meets solitude, temptation has a way of creeping in unnoticed until it owns you. They say the devil finds work for idle hands. That night, mine became his. My aunt was only 5 years older than me. In some ways, she felt more like an older sister than a relative. Young, graceful, and painfully beautiful, she had always carried herself with quiet strength. But since her husband had moved to Dubai just 2 months after their wedding, she had become a woman shadowed by loneliness. She lived alone, tending to her small home, answering every crisis by calling my mother. And every time she called, I was the one who eagerly volunteered to visit, partly to escape my mother's strict presence, but also for reasons I hadn't fully admitted to myself. That afternoon, I returned from college to find my aunt already visiting. Her face was drawn with worry. "The electricity's been out since morning," she said, her eyes glistening. "I forgot to pay the bill, and now I can't find the notice." I asked why she hadn't handled it earlier, and she sighed. "I'm alone. Your uncle's not here. I can't keep track of everything." I offered to take her to the billing office. "Let's just get a duplicate. We'll pay it today, and the power will be back by night." She smiled with relief, and despite being tired and hungry, I walked with her to the office. I paid the bill, and we returned to her house just as night fell. The power had not returned. The house was immersed in thick darkness. As we entered, I turned on my phone's flashlight and led her carefully inside. My eyes landed on her face, glowing faintly in the torchlight. And in that moment, still, shadowed, unguarded, a terrible idea entered my mind. A desire I had kept buried stirred to the surface. I told her to go rest in the bedroom while I tried to sort out some temporary lighting. She hesitated. "I don't like the dark," she admitted. "That's why I asked you to come." I placed my hand gently on her shoulder, acting the part of the caring nephew. "You're not alone," I whispered. "I'm here." I led her to the bed and sat her down, promising I'd return in a few minutes. But as I turned to leave, she clutched my hand, fear etched on her face. She leaned into me without hesitation, wrapping her arms around me tightly. My heart began to race. I whispered again, "It's all right. I'll be back soon." But in truth, I already knew I wasn't thinking about light or safety anymore. I was thinking about what came next. I stepped out of the room, pretending to look for candles or a backup light, but my mind wasn't focused on electricity anymore. It was racing with thoughts that I never imagined I'd entertain. My aunt trusted me, completely, without hesitation. She saw me as a son-like figure, someone she could lean on in her most vulnerable moments. And I, rather than protecting that trust, was quietly planning how to violate it. I stood in the kitchen, the only light coming from my phone's torch, and tried to steady my breathing. I knew what I was thinking was wrong. I knew that no excuse, not loneliness, not youth, not confusion, could ever justify what was forming in my head. But temptation is a strange thing. It doesn't knock. It walks in silently, makes itself comfortable, and convinces you that you're just reacting to what's already there. I opened a drawer and took out a small packet of sleeping pills. They weren't mine. I had noticed them weeks ago while searching for a spoon. I had laughed at the time, thinking, why would she need these? But now I was grateful I remembered. My hands shook slightly as I crushed 2 tablets into powder and stirred them into a warm glass of milk. I felt like a criminal, but I told myself it was just for tonight, just once. When I entered the room again, she was sitting quietly, her arms wrapped around her knees, staring into the shadows. "Here," I said softly, handing her the glass. "Drink this. It'll help you relax." She smiled at me, warmly, gratefully, and took the glass without suspicion. "You're a blessing," she said. "Your uncle might be far, but at least I have you." I didn't respond. I couldn't. Her words stabbed me with guilt, but not enough to stop me. She sipped the milk slowly, still talking. She told me how distant her husband had become, how he rarely called, how she suspected he might have married someone else. Her voice trembled as she confessed how alone she felt, how empty the house was without companionship. And then she began to cry. I sat beside her and pulled her into my arms, pretending to console her. Her body trembled against mine. "You'll be okay," I whispered. "You're not alone. You have me." Her tears soaked into my shirt, and I waited. It wouldn't be long now. Eventually, her voice trailed off mid-sentence. Her grip loosened, her head slumped softly onto my shoulder. The glass had slipped from her fingers and rested on the bed, half empty. I gently laid her down and stood back, watching her breathing slow into the rhythm of deep sleep. In the dim glow of my phone, her face looked calm, peaceful, innocent. She had no idea what I had done. And as I stared down at her, the last fragments of my conscience withered away. Tonight, I was going to take what wasn't mine. She lay there in a pink suit, her arms resting loosely by her side, her breathing soft and even. The sleeping pills had done their job far too well. As I stood over her, the silence in the room grew louder. The only sound was the faint hum of my own breath and the quiet pounding of my guilt, which I tried hard to ignore. In that dim room, beneath the weight of shadows and desire, I crossed the line fully. What I did that night cannot be described in innocent terms. There was no consent, no love, no justification. It was a betrayal masked as opportunity. A moment where I allowed temptation to replace morality. She never stirred, never resisted. The pills kept her far from reality, while I drowned myself in selfish pleasure. By the time dawn crept through the curtains, I was exhausted. Physically, emotionally, spiritually. I laid beside her on the same bed, staring at the ceiling with a strange emptiness. I knew I had done something irreversibly wrong, but the part of me that should have screamed in horror stayed silent. I told myself it was a mistake, a moment of weakness, that I'd never do it again. But I didn't leave. When I finally drifted off to sleep, I placed a pillow on the couch, hoping that if she woke up before me, she would assume I had slept there. It was a small, stupid attempt to cover up something far too large to hide. Late in the afternoon, I woke to find her standing by the window. Her arms were crossed, her face unreadable. She glanced at me, her voice clipped. "You've slept through half the day. Shouldn't you be going home?" For a moment, I panicked. Had she realized something? Did she remember anything? I sat up, trying to act casual. "What's the rush? I'm not a guest here. You're my aunt." I said it with a grin, as if it was a joke, as if last night hadn't happened. I even reached out, pulling her down gently to sit beside me, trying to restore the illusion of familiarity. She pulled away and stood again. "This isn't appropriate. Why were you sleeping here? There are other rooms. A sofa, at least." I froze. My worst fear stirred inside me, but her tone was still more concerned than accusing. I muttered something about being tired, about how dark it was last night. She shook her head, brushing past me as if brushing past the discomfort, and went to the kitchen. I had dodged a bullet. For now. Back at my house, my mother scolded me for staying out all night. I fed her another lie, that my aunt had been afraid in the dark, and asked me to stay. She sighed and dropped the subject. She believed me, just like my aunt had. And I knew then I had found the perfect lie to cover my sin. Worse still, I was already planning when I could go back. The days that followed passed in a haze of conflicting emotions. Shame lingered in the back of my mind, but it never took control. In its place grew a dangerous confidence, the belief that I had outsmarted everyone. My aunt hadn't confronted me. My mother remained unsuspecting. And the opportunity, it seemed, was still mine. I avoided visiting for 2 days, pretending to be busy with college and friends, but the truth was, I was waiting. Waiting for the right excuse to go back. Something that wouldn't raise eyebrows. And then it came, like a gift. My mother was in the kitchen preparing biryani. I stood nearby, pretending to scroll through my phone. Casually, I said, "Aunt really loves biryani. If she lived closer, I'd take some to her right now." My mother paused, glanced at the pot, and then looked at me with a softened expression. "She does like biryani," she said thoughtfully, "and she hasn't visited in a while. Why don't you take some over to her house?" My heart leapt, though I forced a lazy shrug. "If you pack it, I'll go." Within minutes, the container was packed, and I was on my way, riding faster than usual, fueled by anticipation. When I arrived, she was just about to eat. Her face lit up at the sight of the biryani. Your mother remembered me, she smiled, placing a hand on my head. She may complain about me, but her heart is soft. We sat together and shared the meal. I pretended it was an innocent visit, joked about college, asked her about the power, the water bill, anything mundane to keep her at ease. After the meal, I asked for tea. When she got up to make it, I made my next move. While she boiled the water, I slipped away to the local pharmacy and returned with more sleeping pills. That evening, as we sat sipping tea and playing a round of Ludo, I told her she looked weak. You should drink milk regularly, I suggested. She smiled tiredly. There's no one to bring it for me every day. I seized the opportunity. Then let me do it. From now on, I'll bring you milk every night. She looked touched, even a little emotional. You're a blessing, she said, unaware of the trap tightening around her. That night, I prepared the milk myself, warm, sweetened, laced with a crushed pill. She drank it without hesitation, thanking me once more. I used to wonder how I'd survive without him, she whispered, referring to her absent husband. But now, you make it bearable. Her words stung, but not enough. When she drifted off to sleep, I didn't hesitate. I took what I had come for. Again. And just like before, I stayed the night. By morning, I moved to the couch and laid there as if nothing had happened. By now, I knew the rhythm, the routine, the perfect lie, and no one, not even she, seemed close to discovering the truth. It became a routine, simple, predictable, and horrifyingly easy. Every night I brought her milk, every night I slipped in the sleeping pills, and every night, once she drifted into unconsciousness, I took advantage of her trust in ways that now make my soul tremble to remember. At home, no one suspected a thing. My mother had even begun encouraging me to stay over. She's alone, and you're a man now, she'd said. It's good you're looking out for her, but just don't let it affect your studies. I promised her I wouldn't. I lied effortlessly, and my aunt, God help her, grew more and more attached to me. She stopped speaking to the neighbors altogether, just as I'd advised. I had planted fear in her heart, telling her the neighborhood was full of gossiping women who watched her every move, who wanted to see her fail. She believed me. She thanked me for protecting her. She started calling me for everything, fixing a light bulb, checking a water leak, paying a bill. She even began telling people, he's more of a son than a nephew. I nodded, smiled, and continued drugging her each night. But I grew greedy. The thrill wasn't enough on my own anymore. So one night, I called two of my college friends, boys from my inner circle who shared my hunger for thrill and disregard for morality. I told them I had a place. No one would interrupt us. No one would ever know. They arrived late, laughing quietly, carrying bags of cheap alcohol and stories of parties they'd thrown at their own homes. That night, while she lay in her unnatural sleep, we turned her house into a den of filth. My heart pounded, not with fear, but with excitement. I had total control. She would never wake up. She never had before. This happened again and again. Soon, it wasn't just the three of us. Others joined. Friends of friends, girls they brought. What began as a moment of madness had evolved into something organized, something foul, something sick. And I told myself it wasn't that bad. She didn't know. She wouldn't ever know until the night she did. It was supposed to be like every other. I had served the milk, she had drunk it, she had smiled, said thank you, and gone to bed. My friends came. Music played softly in the background. Laughter echoed off the walls. There were girls, barely dressed, dancing in the living room as drinks passed from hand to hand. And then she appeared. In her nightdress, eyes wide open, staring at the scene before her. Everything froze. My heart stopped. I couldn't move. My friends panicked. Some bolted, others ducked out of sight, but she saw it all. Her eyes met mine, and I saw something in her expression I hadn't seen before. Awakening and betrayal. She had woken up too soon, and for the first time I had no excuse that could bury the truth. She stood frozen at the edge of the hallway, her eyes wide with shock, her breath caught in her throat. It was as if the world around us had collapsed and only silence remained. I had never seen her like that, so awake, so aware, so utterly broken. Her eyes scanned the room, the bottles, the girls. My friends scrambling to grab their jackets and escape like rats from a sinking ship. But she saw everything, And then her gaze landed on me. I stood like a statue, stripped of every lie I had built, every excuse I had rehearsed. There was no hiding it now. She walked slowly toward me, step by step, her body trembling. And then, without warning, she grabbed my shirt collar and shook me with a strength that surprised even her. "What was this?" she screamed. "What were you doing in my house?" "Nothing, just some friends. I was studying." The words came out weak, stupid, pointless. "Studying?" she repeated, her voice cracking. "Studying with girls dancing in my living room? With liquor on my kitchen counter? And you, bringing strangers into my home while I was unconscious?" Her hand flew across my face in a slap that echoed louder than the music still playing from my speaker. "I saw everything," she said, trembling. "I saw those girls. I saw your friends. You made my home into a brothel, and I trusted you like my own." I couldn't speak. She broke down into sobs, collapsing onto the couch. "Do you even know what you've done to me?" she cried. "You drugged me every night. You looked into my eyes, pretended to care, and then you turned me into a lifeless body so you and your monsters could use this house like a playground." I dropped to my knees before her. "Please, please don't tell anyone, especially not my mother. She won't survive it." She looked at me, disgusted. "Your mother? The same woman who sacrifices everything so you can study? The one who defends you every time I say you're going astray? The woman who thinks you're her pride?" "I was wrong. I'll change. I swear I'll change. You've already destroyed more than you can fix," she whispered. For a long time, she sat there in silence, wiping tears from her face with shaking hands. Then she looked me dead in the eyes and said something that pierced through every layer of denial I had wrapped around myself. "Get out!" I tried to speak again, to beg, to explain, but she raised her hand and pointed to the door. "Don't ever step in this house again." It was the first time I saw hatred in her eyes. Hatred for me. And as I walked out into the dark street, my heart thudding like a war drum, I knew something irreversible had happened. The lie was over. And now I had to face everything I had run from. I walked back home through the darkness, every step heavier than the last. The streets were quiet, but inside me a storm raged. My hands shook. My ears still rang with her words. "You drugged me. You turned my house into a brothel." Every time I blinked, I saw her face, eyes wide with betrayal, mouth trembling with disbelief. That look would never leave me. When I reached home, the lights were still on. My mother was sitting near the doorway, concern carved deep into her tired face. "You're back early," she said softly. "Is everything okay?" I nodded quickly, avoiding her gaze. "I wasn't feeling well. Aunt's house felt suffocating." She stood up, came to me, and pressed her hand against my forehead. "You don't have a fever. Go rest. You look pale." I nodded again, not trusting myself to speak. I shut the door to my room, collapsed onto the bed, and buried my face into the pillow. What would she think if she knew the truth? That her only son, the one she had raised with such care, for whom she sacrificed her own comfort, was capable of such filth? That night, sleep didn't come. Only fear. What if my aunt told her? What if my father found out? He was a man of discipline, and mercy was not in his nature. I imagined being dragged by the collar, beaten, thrown out, disowned. But the next day came, and nothing happened. No screaming, no call from my aunt, no confrontation from my mother. Days passed and silence remained. That silence felt louder than any punishment, but it was also a shield. My aunt had chosen not to tell. Why? Maybe she didn't want to break my mother's heart. Maybe she didn't want her own pain to become public shame. Or maybe she just wanted me out of her life, forgotten like a nightmare. But I knew I couldn't go back, not just to her home, but to who I was. The weight of what I had done pressed on my chest like a brick. I tried to ignore it, to distract myself. But then the semester results came. I had failed, badly. The news shattered the thin veil I had wrapped around myself. My mother stood staring at the report card, her hands trembling. My father, silent and disappointed, walked away without a word. It was worse than anger. It was abandonment. "I gave up everything for you," my mother whispered. "And this is what you've become?" Her voice didn't rise. It broke. And that broke me. I stood there, unable to answer, knowing I had failed at more than just exams. I had failed as a son, as a student, as a human being. That night, alone in my room, I deleted every contact from those so-called friends. I blocked numbers, erased photos, and broke ties with the people who had fueled my destruction. But deep inside, I knew they weren't the ones who ruined me. I had ruined myself. The silence that followed my failure was not peaceful, it was punishing. I had isolated myself, not just from my family, but from everything I once thought I was. I stopped going out. I stopped meeting people. My mother avoided my eyes, and my father barely spoke. The house felt colder now, not because of the weather, but because of the disappointment hanging in the air. And yet, something in me began to shift. With every moment of isolation, I thought of my aunt, of her trust, her eyes when she discovered the truth, her voice trembling with rage and grief. I had turned her home into a place of shame. I had used her loneliness for my entertainment. No apology could erase that, but perhaps something could still be salvaged. I began focusing on my studies, not because I wanted to win back approval, but because I needed to become someone different, someone better. I woke up early, attended every class, stayed away from distractions. It wasn't easy. The temptations were still there, messages from old friends, invitations to parties. But I ignored them all. More importantly, I never went near my aunt's house again. She didn't call, I didn't try, and that distance felt like a wound I deserved. I stopped looking at girls with lust. I stopped laughing at crude jokes. I started reading, really reading, for the first time in years. And with every small act of discipline, I felt something inside me slowly trying to heal. I knew I couldn't undo the past, but maybe, just maybe, I could change the future. And all I could do now was keep walking. Alone, but finally in the right direction. Time didn't heal everything, but it taught me how to live with what couldn't be undone. In the months that followed, I stayed invisible. I moved through college like a ghost, speaking only when necessary, focusing on my work. Some of my old friends tried to reach out, sensing my withdrawal, but I never replied. I had seen what their influence had turned me into, and I never wanted to go back. At home, my relationship with my mother began to recover slowly. She noticed the change, my improved grades, my regular habits, the absence of lies. But she never asked about what had triggered it. Maybe she sensed the guilt behind my quietness. Maybe she didn't want to know. Either way, she softened. My father, too, began speaking to me again, not with affection, but with cautious approval. But the one person I wanted to face, the one whose forgiveness mattered most, I couldn't bear to see. My aunt had vanished from my world. I never passed her street, never looked at her house. I didn't have the right. Sometimes, late at night, I'd sit alone and wonder what might have happened if she had told my parents. Or worse, gone to the police. She had every right to, but she didn't. Instead, she chose silence. That silence became my greatest punishment, and perhaps my greatest lesson, because some forgiveness isn't spoken. It's felt in what someone chooses not to destroy. And that act of mercy, that quiet restraint, taught me more about justice than any punishment ever could. It's been over a year now. I've kept my promise to myself, to my family, and in some silent way to her. I completed my semester with distinction. I kept away from every influence that once dragged me down. I don't go to parties. I don't chase moments of thrill. I live quietly, almost humbly, trying every day to become someone I wouldn't be ashamed of. But guilt is a shadow that doesn't leave easily. It walks beside me, especially on silent nights. I often wonder if she has truly moved on, or if she still carries the memory of my betrayal, like a wound she hides from the world. I wish I could tell her how sorry I am. Not for being caught, but for ever becoming the kind of person who could harm someone so deeply. I write this not as a confession, but as a warning. To every young man who thinks manhood is about dominance or thrill, know this: there is no pleasure in power stolen from trust. There is no honor in exploiting someone's weakness. What feels like freedom in the moment turns into a lifetime of shame. Our parents sacrifice everything to give us a future. They trust us to become better than what the world expects. And when we betray that trust, whether it's a mother's hope or an aunt's love, we're not just harming others, we're destroying ourselves. I'm rebuilding, slowly, quietly, and maybe someday, if fate allows, I'll stand before her, not for forgiveness, but simply to say, I remember what I did. And I'll carry that memory, not to suffer in guilt, but to live in truth. So I never become that person again.